She thought she was just saving a freezing stranger, until the city's most feared man came back for her, and everyone else was suddenly afraid. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe, because once you step into this world of danger, devotion, and forbidden love, you won't want to miss what happens next. The wind howled down the narrow street like it had a personal grudge, rattling the shop windows and driving icy needles through every crack in the brick. December had arrived with teeth, and tonight felt like the coldest yet. I rubbed my hands together as I flipped the sign on the door from open to closed, the bell chiming softly in the empty shop. Another night alone. The small boutique smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon, a scent I'd chosen because it made customers linger, because warmth, real or imagined, sold better than anything else. Now it just made the quiet feel heavier. I pulled on my scarf, checked the register one last time, and turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the glow from the display window spilling onto the snow-dusted sidewalk outside. The street was nearly deserted. Most people had rushed home hours ago, burrowed into heated apartments or crowded bars glowing with laughter and clinking glasses. I locked the door, the metal cold enough to bite through my gloves, and that's when I noticed him. He stood across the street beneath a flickering street lamp, half-shadowed, half-lit, as if the night couldn't decide whether to hide him or reveal him. He wasn't moving, not pacing, not checking a phone, not even shifting his weight the way people did when they were waiting for someone. He was just standing there. No coat. The realization hit me a second later, sharp and unsettling. The man wore dark trousers and a thin jacket that looked entirely inadequate for the temperature, his hands bare at his sides. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, melting slowly, as if he'd been out there for a long time. Too long. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around my bag strap. The city had taught me caution. You didn't approach strangers at night, especially not ones who stood silently in the cold like something out of a warning story. I told myself to turn away, to walk toward the bus stop like I always did, to mind my own business. But he lifted his head. Even from across the street I could see his face, pale, drawn, sharp in a way that suggested exhaustion rather than threat. His eyes met mine, dark and steady, and something about the way he looked at me made my chest tighten. There was no hunger there, no aggression, just a strange, unsettling calm, threaded with something that looked uncomfortably like resignation, like a man who had already accepted whatever was coming next. I took one step away, then another. The wind cut through my coat, and I thought about how it must feel against skin with no real protection, about how long it took for numbness to turn dangerous, about how many people had probably already walked past him tonight without stopping. I cursed under my breath and turned back. Crossing the street felt like wading into something irreversible. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I approached, my heart pounding too loud in my ears. Up close, the cold radiating off him was unmistakable, a brittle stillness that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with exposure. "You're going to freeze out here," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. He studied me in silence, his gaze sharp despite the faint tremor running through his shoulders. "I'm fine," he replied, and the words were controlled, accented faintly, but his breath fogged thick in the air, betraying the lie. "You're not," I said before I could stop myself. "You don't even have a coat." "I don't need one." That almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I shrugged out of my own coat, the cold immediately searing through my sweater, and held it out to him. "Take it." His eyes flicked to the coat, then back to my face, something unreadable passing through his expression. "No." "Don't be stubborn," I said, annoyed now, more at myself than at him. "You're shivering." I said no. As I stepped closer and draped the coat over his shoulders anyway. The contact was brief, accidental, but the heat beneath his jacket startled me. Not warm, barely hanging on. His body tensed, as if unused to being touched, and for a moment I thought he might push it back at me. He didn't. His hands came up slowly, fingers curling into the fabric like he wasn't entirely sure it was real. His jaw tightened, and he looked away, snow melting into his lashes. "Thank you," he said quietly. The word landed heavier than it should have. "You should find somewhere warm," I said, suddenly aware of how close we were. "A cafe, a shelter, somewhere." He nodded once, though I wasn't convinced he'd listen. "You should go home," he replied. "It's not safe to linger." The irony almost made me smile. I stepped back, the cold instantly clawing at me, and adjusted my scarf. "Take care of yourself," I said, already turning away before I could second-guess everything. I didn't look back as I walked toward the bus stop. I told myself it was nothing. Just a coat. Just a stranger. Just a small kindness on a night that felt too cruel for indifference. I didn't know that somewhere beyond the falling snow, engines were already idling. And that, by morning, the man I'd left standing in the cold would come looking for me. No longer shivering, no longer alone, and powerful enough to make the entire street go silent when he walked through my door. I should have kept walking. That was the thought that repeated itself with every step I took away from him, the wind biting through my sweater where my coat used to be. My hands were already numb, my breath coming out in short, sharp bursts as I waited at the bus stop, staring down the empty street. The snow had thickened, swirling beneath the streetlights in soft, relentless spirals. I told myself he would be fine, that someone else would stop, that he'd find warmth somewhere, that it wasn't my responsibility. But the image of his eyes refused to leave me. There had been something there I couldn't shake, something too raw, too stripped bare to belong to a man pretending. Fear, yes, but not the frantic kind. It was quieter than that. Heavy. The kind that settled into a person when they'd been cold for too long, not just in body, but in spirit. The bus was late. Again. I glanced over my shoulder before I could stop myself. He was still there. Still standing beneath the flickering street lamp, my coat now hanging from his broad shoulders, dark against the white of the falling snow. He hadn't moved an inch. The sight sent a ripple of unease through me, followed immediately by guilt. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to conserve warmth, trying not to overthink the way he looked like a statue carved from shadow and snowfall. I could leave. The bus would come eventually. Instead, I turned back. My boots crunched loudly as I crossed the street again, each step feeling heavier than the last, as though the night itself was trying to pull me back. As I drew closer, I noticed details I'd missed before. The faint cut along his cheekbone, the stiffness in the way he held his shoulders, as if pain lived there. His hands, long, strong, but slightly trembling despite his effort to still them. "You're still here," I said softly. His gaze snapped to mine, sharp despite the exhaustion etched into his face. For a heartbeat, something dangerous flashed there. Instinct, maybe, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by weary restraint. "I told you to go home," he said. "I tried," I admitted. "I couldn't." That earned me a look of genuine surprise. Up close, he didn't look homeless, or drunk, or unstable. He looked displaced. Like a man who belonged somewhere very different from a frozen sidewalk, like someone used to being in control and furious with himself for losing it. "You shouldn't be back here," he said, lower now. "It's not safe." "For me?" I asked. "For anyone who stays near me too long." The words should have scared me. They probably would have, if they'd been spoken with menace. Instead, they sounded like a warning he didn't expect me to heed. "I didn't get your name," I said, changing the subject before my nerves could catch up to my instincts. A pause. Then, "Neither did I." I almost smiled. "Do you have somewhere to go?" I asked. "Because if you don't, I can at least call someone. Or walk you to a cafe. There's one a few blocks away that stays open late." He hesitated, eyes flicking briefly to the darkened alley behind him. For a split second, I had the strangest sensation of being watched, like the night itself was holding its breath. I glanced around instinctively, but all I saw were snow-covered cars and empty windows. "I can't," he said finally. "Can't what?" "Be seen." The answer sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Then why are you standing under a streetlight?" A corner of his mouth lifted faintly, not quite a smile. Because hiding all the time is exhausting. That honesty hit harder than any threat could have. I exhaled slowly. Then at least take the coat. Please, I'll survive the walk home. You look like you won't. He studied my face as if trying to memorize it, something intense and searching in his eyes. People don't usually stop, he said. Not like this. I know, I replied. That's why I did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Snow settled on his lashes again, melting slowly, and I realized how close I was standing. Close enough to feel the heat of him now that the coat was doing its job. Close enough that the world felt strangely narrowed to just the two of us. Thank you, he said again, quieter this time. You already said that. I didn't say it properly. Something about the way he said it made my throat tighten. I should go, I said, forcing myself to step back. Please, don't give the coat away or leave it behind. It's warm. I won't, he promised. I turned away before I could change my mind again, my pulse racing as I walked back toward the bus stop. The cold felt sharper now, but beneath it was a strange warmth, an echo of something I couldn't name. I didn't see the dark SUV parked half a block away, and I didn't notice the man across the street lowering his phone after taking a photo, and I had no idea that my small act of kindness had already been observed, catalogued, and reported, marked as a complication in a plan that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the man now standing in my coat, watching me disappear into the snow. The next morning I couldn't shake the feeling that the night before had been unfinished. It clung to me as I unlocked the shop, as I turned on the lights and watched the familiar space come alive again. The heater hummed weakly, fighting the lingering cold that had settled deep into the walls. Outside, the street looked harmless in the pale winter daylight, as if it hadn't swallowed a silent man whole just hours earlier. I told myself I was being dramatic. Strangers crossed paths every day. Kindness didn't always lead somewhere. Sometimes it was just a moment, fleeting and forgettable. And yet, when the bell above the door chimed late that afternoon, my heart stuttered. He stood just inside the doorway, framed by falling snow and gray light, my coat folded neatly over his arm. He looked different, cleaned up for one. His hair was still dark and unruly, but no longer crusted with snow. His posture was straighter, more controlled, like the cold had been a temporary inconvenience rather than something that had nearly claimed him. Still, there was something guarded about the way he stood, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the shop with quick, practiced precision, as if he was mapping exits. I think this belongs to you, he said. His voice was the same, low, calm, edged with restraint, but hearing it indoors made it more intimate. Too intimate. I swallowed and nodded. Thank you, I said. I wasn't sure I'd see it again. You shouldn't have trusted me with it, he replied, not unkindly. I took the coat from him, my fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. Warm, steady, very much alive. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, one I dismissed just as quickly. Did you find somewhere warm? I asked. Yes. That's good. He didn't move to leave. Silence stretched between us, thick and strange. Up close, I noticed details I'd missed before. A faint bruise at his temple, yellowed like it was a day or two old. A thin scar disappearing beneath his collar. His eyes, dark, observant, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with last night's cold. You could have asked for more, I said, before I could stop myself. Help, I mean. A ride, a phone, money. I don't accept charity, he said immediately. The sharpness of the answer surprised me. Then why accept the coat? His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw something flicker beneath his control. Conflict, maybe, or something like pride colliding with necessity. Because you didn't offer it like charity, he said finally. You offered it like it mattered. The words settled heavily in the space between us. I looked away, pretending to straighten a stack of scarves. Well, I'm glad it helped. It did, he said, more than you know. Something in the way he said it made my chest ache, as though he were talking about more than warmth, as though the coat had been permission, not protection. You should be careful, he added quietly. I glanced up. About giving away coats? About stopping, he corrected. Some people aren't lost. They're hiding. That should have unsettled me. Instead, it made me curious. And you? I asked. Were you lost or hiding? His gaze held mine, intense enough to make the air feel thinner. Last night, he said. I wasn't allowed to be either. Before I could ask what that meant, the bell chimed again. A customer entered, shaking snow from their boots, breaking the spell. When I turned back, the man was already stepping away, his expression shuddered once more. Thank you, he said again, softer this time, for seeing me. Then he was gone. I watched through the window as he disappeared down the street, his stride purposeful now, as if he knew exactly where he was going. I didn't see the black sedan parked at the corner. I didn't notice the way its engine started the moment he passed, and I had no idea that refusing help, everything except a simple coat, had been the only choice he could make that night without putting me directly in the line of fire, because warmth was one thing, but letting someone too close, that was dangerous. The street didn't feel the same when I came back that evening. It was subtle at first. The air was still cold, the snow still falling in soft, lazy flakes that clung to the edges of the sidewalk and the awnings overhead. But something underneath it all had shifted, like the moment before a storm breaks, too quiet, too still, as if the city itself were holding its breath. I unlocked the shop and stepped inside, rubbing my hands together as the heater sputtered to life. The lights flickered on, casting their familiar glow over shelves of scarves, gloves, and winter coats. It should have felt comforting. Instead, a prickle of unease crept up my spine. The bell above the door chimed softly as it swung shut behind me. I set my bag down, shrugged out of my sweater, and went to flip the sign to open. That's when I noticed the reflection in the glass. Black. Long. Unmistakably expensive. SUVs. 1, 2, 3 of them, lined the street directly in front of my shop. Engines idling, windows darkened. They hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. I was certain of it. A fourth vehicle rolled slowly to the curb behind them, completing the line like a sentence ending in a period. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. For a wild second, I thought they were here for someone else. A neighbor. A mistake. Something unrelated to me. My shop was small, unimportant. I sold winter accessories and handmade gifts. I didn't owe anyone money. I didn't know anyone important. The driver's door of the first SUV opened, then the second. Men stepped out in unison. Dark coats, sharp movements, scanning the street with practiced efficiency. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The sidewalk emptied almost instantly. A couple across the street turned and hurried away. A delivery driver froze, then quietly climbed back into his van. Fear crept cold and heavy into my chest. The bell above my door chimed again. I spun around just as he stepped inside. For a heartbeat, I didn't recognize him. He wasn't shivering now. He wasn't pale or drawn or half lost beneath a flickering street lamp. He wore a perfectly tailored black coat, expensive enough that I could feel it from across the room. His hair was neatly styled, his posture straight, controlled, radiating a calm authority that made the space feel smaller the moment he entered it. Behind him, the men outside went still. The door closed. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. The absolute kind. The kind that swallowed sound and replaced it with attention. His eyes found mine immediately. They were the same eyes. Dark, steady. But now there was nothing tired in them. Nothing uncertain. This man didn't belong to the cold. He commanded it. You shouldn't be alone, he said quietly. My mouth went dry. You gave me my coat back. A corner of his mouth lifted, faint and unreadable. I told you I would. The bell chimed again as 2 of his men entered the shop, positioning themselves near the door and the back hallway. They didn't touch anything, didn't speak, but their presence pressed in from all sides, an invisible wall snapping into place. What is this? I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it steady. What's going on? He took a single step closer. I realized then how tall he was, How broad his shoulders were beneath that coat. How effortlessly he occupied space. "I owe you an explanation," he said, "and an apology." "For what?" My pulse thundered in my ears. "For what's about to happen," he replied. One of the men outside murmured something into an earpiece. He lifted a hand slightly, and the man fell silent instantly. I stared at him, the memory of the night before crashing violently into the present. The quiet stranger in the snow. The coat. The gratitude. This man was not that man. Or maybe he was, and I'd only seen part of him. "You said you didn't accept charity," I whispered. "I don't," he agreed. "I accept debts." My stomach dropped. "You gave me warmth when I was supposed to disappear," he continued. "You interrupted something that was meant to end quietly." A chill crawled up my spine. "And what?" He studied my face, something like regret flickering across his expression. "Me." The word echoed between us, heavy and final. Before I could respond, footsteps sounded outside. Another man approached the shop window, glanced inside, and visibly stiffened. He turned and left without entering. "Who are you?" I asked. He held my gaze. "A man with enemies," he said simply. "And now, unfortunately, a man with a reason to protect you." "I don't need protection," I said automatically. His eyes softened just enough to make my heart stutter. "You didn't need to give me your code either." The truth of that silenced me. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said. "But you need to listen to me very carefully." I nodded, unable to do anything else. "For tonight, you stay here," he continued. "My men will remain outside. No one will come near you without my permission." "And after tonight?" I asked. He took another step closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "After tonight, your life won't be as small as it was this morning." Fear and something dangerously close to awe tangled in my chest. The man I'd thought was just a shivering stranger stood before me now, warm, powerful, and utterly in control. And the footprints he'd left in the snow? They had led straight back to my door. The silence stretched between us until it became unbearable. I stood behind the counter, fingers curled so tightly around the edge that my knuckles ached, watching him as if he might dissolve into smoke if I blinked. Outside, the SUVs idled like patient predators. Inside, the air felt charged, every breath heavy with things I didn't yet understand. "You're scaring my customers away," I said weakly, gesturing toward the empty street. A flicker of something almost amused crossed his face. "That was not my intention," he replied. "But fear has a way of spreading when it recognizes authority." That word, authority, settled deep in my stomach. "You said you owed me an explanation," I said. "I'm still waiting." He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing what I could handle. Then he nodded once, decisive. "Lock the door," he said. My heart lurched. "What?" "Please," he added, softer now. "For your own safety." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to run, to call the police. But something stronger, something reckless, pushed me forward. I walked around the counter, flipped the sign to closed, and turned the lock with trembling hands. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet shop. When I turned back, he was closer. "My name is Luca Moretti," he said. "And I am not homeless, nor was I lost." I swallowed. "Then why were you standing in the snow like that?" "Because someone wanted me to die without witnesses," he answered calmly. "No blood, no noise, just exposure. An accident that they would have called it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Die?" I whispered. "Yes." He removed his gloves slowly, deliberately, setting them on the counter like a ritual. His hands were steady now, strong, completely unmarked by fear. "You see," he continued, "when a man like me is targeted, it's rarely impulsive. It's planned, carefully. That night, my car was disabled, my phone destroyed, my security pulled away under false orders. Cold seeped into my bones, even with the heater running. And you? I asked. You were just left? He nodded. Left in the cold. Alone. The snow was convenient. It covers mistakes. I thought of how still he'd been beneath that street lamp, how resigned, how he'd looked at me like someone who had already said goodbye to the world. And the coat, I said slowly, his gaze sharpened, changed everything. I shook my head, disbelief flooding me. It was just a coat. No, he said firmly. It was time, warmth, visibility. When you stopped, when you touched me, you made me seen. My breath caught. The men watching me realized the plan was compromised, he went on. A body doesn't die quietly when someone is paying attention. When I walked away wearing your coat, it bought me enough time for my people to track me. The memory of that black sedan starting its engine flashed through my mind. They found me 20 minutes later, he said. If you hadn't come back, if you hadn't insisted, I wouldn't be standing here. The room felt too small, too bright. My knees weakened, and I gripped the counter again to stay upright. You're saying, I managed, that I saved your life? He took one more step closer, lowering his voice. Yes. The word echoed louder than anything else he'd said. I didn't know, I whispered. I swear I didn't. I know, he interrupted gently. That's why it matters. I looked at him then, really looked. Not at the tailored coat or the power humming beneath his skin, but at the man who had stood freezing in the snow, waiting for an end he couldn't prevent. You're Mafia, I said, the word tasting unreal. A muscle in his jaw tightened. That is what they call me. The most feared man in the city, I added, recalling headlines I'd skimmed and forgotten, names whispered on late-night news segments. That's you. Yes, fear finally bloomed fully in my chest. Then why are you here? Why come back to me? Because kindness creates responsibility, he said, and because the people who tried to kill me now know about you. My blood ran cold. They know about me? They will, he corrected. Soon. You are a loose end in a story that should have ended last night. I stared at him, panic clawing its way up my throat. I didn't ask for this. No, he agreed quietly, but you chose to help me anyway. He reached into his coat and pulled out my gloves, the ones I'd dropped in the snow without realizing. He set them gently on the counter between us. You saved my life tonight, he said, his voice low and unwavering. And in my world, that is not something that goes unanswered. I looked at the gloves, at him, at the locked door. Outside, engines hummed, steady and ominous. For the first time, I understood the truth. The night I gave my coat to a stranger, I hadn't just interrupted an assassination. I had stepped into his world. I should have told him to leave. That was the sensible response, the normal one. To unlock the door, step aside, and pretend this conversation had never happened. Pretend that I hadn't just learned a man had nearly died on my sidewalk. Pretend that black SUVs and silent bodyguards were not now a part of my reality. Instead, I stood there, frozen, staring at the gloves he'd placed on the counter, like a promise I didn't remember agreeing to. You can't stay here, I said finally. This is a shop. I close in an hour. You won't be closing tonight, he replied calmly. The certainty in his voice made my spine stiffen. You don't get to decide that. His gaze softened just a fraction, but it didn't retreat. I don't want to decide it, he said. I need to. I shook my head, a nervous laugh slipping out. You're talking like I belong to you. The words hung between us, fragile and sharp. He stepped closer, not invading my space, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, steady and controlled. No, he said quietly. I'm talking like someone who understands what happens to people who are seen helping men like me. My chest tightened. You said they don't know about me yet. They will, he replied. By morning at the latest. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with winter. You stopped for me, he continued. That means you're observable, trackable. In my world, that makes you vulnerable. I didn't do anything wrong, I whispered. I know, he said immediately. That's why this bothers me. The admission caught me off guard. I've already put security on your building, he went on, as if discussing something trivial. Unmarked, discreet. No one approaches without my knowledge. My pulse spiked. You what? It's temporary, he added, reading the panic on my face, until this situation is resolved. You didn't ask. No, he agreed. I acted. Anger flared hot and sudden, cutting through the fear. You don't get to rearrange my life because you feel grateful. Something dark flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, but something more dangerous. Possession sharpened by restraint. Gratitude isn't why I'm doing this, he said. Then why? Because the thought of you being hurt because of me is unacceptable. The intensity of his gaze made my breath hitch. There was no hesitation in his voice, no performance, just certainty. I don't need a guard, I said weakly. I've lived here for years without enemies who freeze men to death, he cut in quietly. Silence fell again. I crossed my arms, trying to reclaim some sense of control. So, what now? You post men outside my door and call it thanks? He studied me for a long moment, as if recalibrating. No, he said. Now you come with me. My heart slammed violently against my ribs. Absolutely not. I'm not asking, he replied, then paused. I am offering. Offering what? Safety, he said. Warmth. Space. Time for this to be handled properly. And if I say no? His jaw tightened. Then I increase the security around you and hope nothing slips through. That doesn't sound like much of a choice. He didn't deny it. I don't like forcing things, he said quietly. But I won't pretend the risk doesn't exist. I searched his face for deception, for manipulation, for the monster everyone whispered about. What I found instead unsettled me more. Concern, focused, personal, dangerously sincere. You barely know me, I said. I know you went back into the cold when you didn't have to, he replied. I know you looked at a man who should have frightened you and saw someone worth helping. His voice dropped. People like me don't forget that. The way he said it made my skin prickle. This isn't gratitude, I murmured. It feels like ownership. He stepped closer still, lowering his voice so only I could hear. Protection often does, he said, especially when it's personal. My breath came shallow now. Why does this feel different? Because it is, he said. I don't guard strangers. Outside, one of his men shifted, the subtle reminder that this conversation existed within a much larger machine, one that now revolved around me. If I go with you, I said slowly, this doesn't mean I belong to you. His gaze held mine, intense and unwavering. No, he said. It means no one else gets to touch you. The words sent a shiver straight down my spine. I didn't answer right away. Somewhere deep down, instinct whispered that whatever choice I made next would change everything. That safety offered by a man like him was never just safety. It was a claim. And the terrifying truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to refuse it. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the shop lights were turned off, after his men quietly escorted me through the back and into a waiting car, after the city blurred past the tinted windows like a world I no longer belonged to, sleep stayed far out of reach. My body was warm, wrapped in borrowed comfort, but my mind kept circling the same thought over and over again. I had been seen, not just by him, but by everyone watching him. The apartment he brought me to was nothing like my own. It was high above the city, all glass and steel and quiet power, the kind of place that didn't need decorations to prove its worth. One entire wall overlooked the river, dark and endless, reflecting the city lights like scattered stars. Security was everywhere and nowhere at once. I never saw them move, but I always felt them. You'll be safe here, he said, as one of his men discreetly checked the locks. No one comes near without my knowledge. Safe. The word should have comforted me. Instead, it made my chest tighten. What about my shop? I asked. My life? His gaze softened, but it didn't yield. Still yours. Just temporarily protected. Protected. Contained. Observed. When he finally left me alone in the guest room, I stood by the window for a long time, hugging my arms around myself, watching headlights snake through the streets below. Somewhere out there were people who now knew my face, who knew I mattered to him. That was the danger. By morning, it became impossible to pretend otherwise. It started with the messages. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Unknown numbers, empty voicemails, calls that disconnected the moment I answered. Then a photo arrived. Grainy. Taken from across the street. It was me, locking up the shop. My stomach dropped. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed, already alert, reading something on a tablet as if the world wasn't quietly closing in around me. "They're watching," I said, holding out my phone with shaking hands. He looked at the screen once. That was all it took. His jaw tightened. The air around him seemed to harden, like a storm pulling itself together. I was hoping we had more time. "You said they wouldn't know about me yet." "They didn't," he replied. "Now they do." Fear flared sharp and bright. "Because of you." "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Because of me." The honesty knocked the breath from my lungs. "You should hate me," he added quietly. "Most people would." I laughed once, hollow and brittle. "I don't even know how to begin hating you. I barely know you." "You know enough," he said. "You know what it costs to be noticed." I did now. By afternoon, the city felt different. Every passing car seemed too slow. Every stranger's glance lingered too long. I jumped at shadows, at reflections in glass, at footsteps behind me in hallways that weren't even public. He never left my side. Not openly. Not possessively in a way anyone else could see. But I always felt his attention. Steady and intense, tracking me the way his men tracked threats. When I spoke, he listened like every word mattered. When I moved, he adjusted without thinking, placing himself between me and doors, windows, exits. It was subtle, it was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. "You're staring," I said at one point, trying to sound light as we stood near the window again. "I'm assessing risk," he replied. "I'm not a battlefield." "No," he said, eyes darkening as they met mine. "You're a weakness." The word should have hurt. Instead, it sent a strange heat curling through my chest. "Do you know what happens to weaknesses in your world?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes." "And you're still looking at me like that." His voice dropped. "Because I don't intend to lose you." The weight of those words pressed down hard. "I didn't ask for your attention," I whispered. "I know. And I don't know if I can survive it." That made him still. For the first time since we met, something like doubt flickered across his face. "You think my attention is worse than my enemy's?" "I think it paints a bigger target," I said. "Hatred is blunt. Love is precise." His gaze sharpened, something dangerous and raw beneath the surface now. "You think this is love?" I swallowed. "I think it's something just as reckless." Silence fell between us, heavy and charged. "You were invisible before," he said finally, "safe in that invisibility. I won't lie to you. Stepping into my world means you give that up." "I already have," I said quietly, "the moment I stopped for you." "Yes," he agreed. "And kindness always demands payment." I looked at him then. Not the feared man, not the protector, but the stranger who had stood freezing in the snow, waiting to disappear. "And what's the cost?" I asked. His eyes locked onto mine, unflinching. "Being seen by me." A shiver ran through me, because in that moment, I understood the truth. The danger wasn't just the men circling closer in the dark. It was the way his attention wrapped around me, warm, consuming, impossible to escape. And once a man like him decided you mattered. There was no going back to the shadows. The snow started falling harder just after midnight. Thick, heavy flakes pressed against the glass, blurring the city lights into smeared halos of white and gold. The apartment felt too quiet, the kind of silence that hummed with warning. I stood near the window, arms wrapped around myself, watching the street below disappear beneath fresh snowfall. "You're pacing," he said behind me. I turned. He stood near the door, jacket already on, expression carved from calm stone. The kind of calm that didn't come from peace, but from readiness. "I don't like this," I admitted. "It feels wrong, like something's about to happen." Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. It already has. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen once, then slipped it into his pocket. "We're leaving," he said. My heart lurched. "Leaving where?" "Downstairs," he replied. "Now." The tone in his voice erased any thought of argument. I grabbed my coat as he guided me toward the private elevator, his hand firm at the small of my back. Not forceful, but unyielding. The doors slid shut, sealing us into a narrow space filled with tension and the faint scent of his cologne. "Tell me what's going on," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it. "They made a move," he answered. "Sooner than expected." The elevator descended too slowly. Every second felt stretched thin, fragile. When the doors opened, the underground garage was lit stark white, shadows sharp and unforgiving. 2 black SUVs waited, engines running. His men were already in position, movements precise, weapons concealed but ready. That's when I heard it. The sound was distant at first, sharp, cracking, unmistakable. Gunfire. My breath caught. "Oh my God!" He moved instantly, pulling me behind him as a shot rang out, closer this time. The echo bounced violently off concrete. One of his men shouted, returning fire as chaos erupted in a burst of motion and noise. "Stay with me," he said, gripping my wrist. "Do not let go!" I didn't argue. I couldn't. He became my entire world as he maneuvered us toward the nearest vehicle, his body a shield between me and the violence exploding around us. Another shot. A scream. Tires screeched. The snow outside the garage entrance was pristine when we burst through it. Seconds later, it wasn't. A man went down hard near the curb, blood blooming vivid and horrifying against the white ground. Red soaked into snow like spilled ink, stark and impossible to ignore. I gagged, panic clawing up my throat. "This is my fault," I whispered. "No," he said sharply. "This is theirs." More shots cracked through the night. His men formed a moving barrier, returning fire with ruthless precision. I could hear shouting now, voices filled with rage, desperation, orders barked too late. I stumbled, my boot sliding on ice. He caught me instantly. For a split second, everything slowed. A gunshot rang out, so close it felt like the air itself tore apart. He twisted, dragging me down behind the SUV, his body covering mine as we hit the frozen ground hard. Pain exploded through my shoulder. I cried out. "Are you hit?" he demanded, hands already on me, checking, searching. I don't think so," I gasped. "I fell." Only then did I realize the warmth soaking through my sleeve wasn't mine. Blood. His blood. "No," I whispered, horror flooding my chest. "You're bleeding." He glanced down once at the dark stain spreading across his side, then back at me, jaw clenched. "It's nothing," he said. "You were shot." His eyes never left my face. "And you're alive." The gunfire intensified. One of his men yelled a warning. He didn't hesitate. He turned his head and gave a single command. "End it." The words were quiet. Final. Within seconds, it was over. The remaining attackers fled into the night, engines roaring as they vanished, leaving behind only silence, smoke, and blood-stained snow. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, too far, too late. His men moved quickly, efficiently. Someone pressed a hand to his wound. Another opened the SUV door. "You need a hospital," I said desperately, clutching his coat. "Please." He cupped my face instead. his thumb brushing beneath my eye where tears had spilled without me realizing it. "They wanted me to choose," he said softly. "Choose what?" "Revenge," he replied. "Or you." My chest tightened painfully. "I chose you." The weight of that crashed into me harder than the gunfire had. "They were trying to draw you out," I whispered. "Yes." "And you still came." His gaze softened in a way that shattered something inside me. "Because you treated me like a man, when everyone else saw a monster." He leaned closer, forehead resting briefly against mine. Despite the blood, despite the danger, despite the world still spinning violently around us. "I will burn this city down before I let them take you," he murmured. The words should have terrified me. Instead, as I clung to him while the snow around us turned red, I realized something irreversible had happened. This wasn't just protection anymore. It was devotion, and it came at a price paid in blood. The city didn't sleep that night. It held its breath. The snow had been cleared by the time dawn crept in, but the memory of Red still lingered in my mind, vivid and unshakable. Sirens had come and gone. The garage had been scrubbed clean. Statements had been made without words ever being spoken. Violence erased as efficiently as it had arrived. But the echo of it stayed with me. I sat in a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and leather, my hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched. Across from me, he stood near the window, a white bandage stark against his dark clothing. The wound had been treated, not in a hospital, never that, but by a doctor who arrived silently and left just as quickly. "You should be resting," I said. He didn't turn. "I am." It was a lie, and we both knew it. The city lights reflected in the glass, broken and distant. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked tired. Not physically, he hid pain too well for that, but emotionally, as if something had finally cracked under the weight he carried. "They're gone," he said. "For now." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "You were brave tonight," he added. "I was terrified," I corrected. He finally turned to face me, his gaze steady but searching. Bravery and fear often walk together. Silence settled again, heavy and intimate. "I need to be honest with you," he said at last. "More honest than I've been with anyone in a very long time." My pulse quickened. "Okay." "You were right," he continued. "My attention makes things worse before they make them better. My world doesn't allow for gentle transitions. I thought of the gunfire, the blood in the snow, the way his body had shielded mine without hesitation. "I can get you out," he said. "Tonight. A car, a plane, a new apartment somewhere no one would ever connect to me. Money enough that you wouldn't have to worry again." My chest tightened. "And you?" "I would remove myself from your life completely." The idea hit harder than it should have. "That's one option," he went on. "You go back to being invisible, safe, untouched by what you've seen." "And the other?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You stay." The word hung between us, dangerous and heavy. "Stay where?" I asked, though I already knew. "With me," he said. "Under my protection. In my world." I wrapped my arms around myself. "That's not protection. That's confinement." He didn't argue. "Yes." The admission made my breath hitch. "If you stay," he continued, "you won't be able to come and go freely. There will be rules, security, eyes always watching. You will be safe, but not free." "And if I leave?" His gaze darkened. "I will still protect you. From a distance. But I can't promise the same certainty." I laughed quietly, hollow. "So my choices are a cage or a shadow." "A sanctuary," he corrected softly. "Or a risk." I walked past him, needing space, my footsteps echoing against the polished floor. I thought of my shop, my small, quiet routines, the life I'd built piece by piece in relative obscurity. I also thought of the way his arms had closed around me in the garage, the way he'd bled for me without hesitation. "I don't belong in your world," I said. He followed me, stopping just behind my shoulder. You already stepped into it. I don't want to be owned, I whispered. His voice dropped. I don't want to own you. But you would, I said, in ways you can't help. He didn't deny it. Yes, the honesty was devastating. I would ask you to trust me, he continued, to accept that some freedoms are exchanged for safety, for loyalty. I turned to face him. And what do you give up? He met my gaze without flinching. Control. That surprised me. You would matter, he said. Enough that I would change how I move, how I act. Enough that your voice would weigh against my instincts. I searched his face for manipulation, for strategy, found none. What if I say no? I asked. Then I walk you back into the quiet, he replied. And I carry the knowledge that I let the one person who saw me as human walk away. The room felt too small for the decision pressing down on me. You shouldn't make promises like this, I said. Not to someone you barely know. He stepped closer, close enough that his breath brushed my cheek. I don't make promises lightly, he murmured, and I never make them in the dark. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took my hand. Whatever you choose, he said, I will honor it. The sincerity in his voice undid me. I looked at our joined hands, at the man who had stood freezing in the snow, at the man who now offered me safety at the cost of my freedom. I need time, I whispered. He nodded. You have it. Outside, the city stirred back to life, unaware of the choice being weighed in silence. And as dawn broke through the darkness, I realized something terrifying. No matter what I chose, my quiet life was already gone. All that remained was deciding which darkness I was willing to live in. Morning came quietly, the way it always does after violence, soft light pretending nothing had been broken. I stood alone by the window, watching steam rise from the city as snow melted into slush and memory. Somewhere below, traffic resumed its rhythm. People hurried to work, to coffee, to lives untouched by what had almost ended mine. The world hadn't paused for me. It never did. Behind me, the room was still. He hadn't slept. I knew that without looking. Men like him didn't rest when their thoughts were louder than their bodies. My coat hung over the back of a chair, the same one I'd draped over his shoulders days ago. It looked ordinary now. Wool, faded at the cuffs. Something I'd owned for years without thinking much of it. I crossed the room and touched the sleeve, my fingers brushing the fabric where his blood had once soaked through and been carefully cleaned away. It should have meant nothing. A practical thing, a reflex of kindness, something easily forgotten. But nothing about this felt temporary anymore. I'll have the car ready whenever you want, he said behind me. Not pushing, not commanding, just stating a fact. I turned slowly. He stood near the door, jacket buttoned, face composed, eyes giving nothing away. The mask was back in place, but I knew now what lived beneath it. Exhaustion, vigilance, and something fragile he didn't let anyone touch. You're already planning for me to leave, I said softly. He didn't deny it. I plan for every outcome. I nodded, swallowing the ache rising in my chest. If I walk out that door, will you let me disappear? His jaw tightened. I will let you live. That's not what I asked. Silence stretched between us, thick and weighted. No, he said finally. I won't forget you. The honesty in his voice struck deeper than any promise. I walked toward him, stopping just short of the space he guarded so carefully. You know what scares me most? I asked. His eyes flicked to mine. Tell me. That staying will change me, I said. That I'll stop recognizing the person I was before you. His voice dropped. And leaving? I exhaled. That walking away will hollow me out. That I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been braver. He studied me like he was memorizing my face, as if this moment mattered more than any deal or war he'd ever fought. You didn't save me with the coat, he said quietly. I frowned. You said, I said you saved my life, he corrected. Not my body. I felt my breath catch. I've been protected my entire life, he continued, surrounded by men, weapons, power. None of it kept me warm. None of it made me feel human. That night, in the snow, you didn't ask who I was. You didn't demand anything. You didn't fear me. I looked down at my hands. I thought you were just cold. He stepped closer. I was. His fingers brushed the sleeve of my coat, reverent. This wasn't fabric to me. It was proof that I still existed outside of fear, that someone could see me and choose kindness anyway. My chest tightened painfully. If you leave, he said, I will survive. I always do. But I will lose something I didn't know I could have again. And if I stay, I whispered, then the world will never be simple for you again, he replied. But you will never be unseen. The weight of the choice pressed down on me, heavy and final. I thought of my shop, the quiet, the safety of anonymity, the comfort of being small enough to avoid notice. I thought of the snow, the shivering man, the moment I chose to stop. I reached for my coat and lifted it from the chair, held it between us. This was never meant to last, I said. He met my gaze. Neither was I. The truth of that unraveled something inside me. Slowly, deliberately, I draped the coat over his shoulders again. Not because he needed warmth, but because I did. I'm not staying because I'm trapped, I said. And I'm not staying because I'm afraid. His breath stilled. I'm staying because some kindnesses don't end, I continued. Because walking away now would cost more than I'm willing to lose. For the first time since I'd known him, his control cracked completely. He didn't touch me right away. He just stood there, eyes dark, reverent, like he'd been given something sacred. When he finally pulled me into his arms, it wasn't possession. It was gratitude. Outside, the last traces of snow disappeared under the rising sun, and I understood with quiet certainty that the warmth I'd offered him that night had never been temporary. It had been a beginning, and neither of us was walking away.